Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Gugliotto, and I'd like to welcome you to TransLink's second open board meeting of 2020. Thank you for joining us today in this virtual setting during these unprecedented times. We've all had to adopt to new ways of working and learning and troubleshooting new technologies and platforms, so we're off to a great start. At this point, I'd like to call today's meeting to order. I want to acknowledge that we are presenting today from the TransLink and TransLink operates services throughout the traditional territories of the Lower Mainland Coast Salish peoples, and our board is joining us from various locations within these traditional territories. Sorry, excuse me for a sec, we're just trying to, there we go. So today, I'm joining this meeting from the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam. I'd also like to highlight that it is National Indigenous Peoples Day on Sunday, June 21st. This day is set apart to celebrate the heritage, diverse cultures, and outstanding achievements of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Don't miss the opportunity on Sunday to celebrate and learn more about the cultural diversity of Indigenous people by engaging with online resources. So we have lots to discuss today, so we'll begin our meeting with items in the consent agenda, if you would just refer to that. If I can have, if there are any questions on the consent agenda? Hearing none, get a motion to approve.
So moved. Larry here.
Okay.
Second it.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, so the consent agenda is approved. We're now going to move into the public delegations, and I'm just going to get my list here in terms of the public delegation. Just bear with me for a second. So our first speaker is John Irwin. John, are you able to hear us? I'm wondering, John, if you have if you're on mute or not. Connie? Okay, I don't think John's available to join us, so we'll go on to our next speaker, which is Connie. Connie, are you able to hear us?
Members of the TransLink board, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm here to request the restoration of the Round the Park bus service for the summer of 2020 that was discontinued in 2008. This summer service, which provided access by stopping at points of interest around the park, is needed now more than ever. Stanley Park is a favorite with tourists who visit our province, but as a public park that is maintained by our Vancouver Park Board, it is first and foremost a park for residents. The City of Vancouver declared a climate emergency in 2019 and continues to seek out ways in which to reduce the carbon we produce through transportation, which is approximately 35% of the total. Transit is a critical part of solving this issue, and it is not a small part either. Without viable and accessible options, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to persuade Vancouverites and British Columbians as a whole to leave their car at home. There is currently a lively debate stemming from the temporary closure of the Park Drive to motor vehicles, which the Vancouver Park Board did in response to the need for social distancing in the time of pandemic. Many cite the difficulty of reaching areas in the park beyond the bus stop at Lost Lagoon. The great size of the park means that those who are not able to walk, run, or cycle are effectively dependent on the private car to access Ferguson Point, Second Beach, Prospect Point, Beaver Pond, and so many other sites in the Stanley Park, which were stops on the Round the Bus loop. TransLink's website includes the following statement. Climate change and environmental sustainability are issues we take seriously, and we're working to reduce our ecological impact across our operations. I commend TransLink for this declaration, and I would suggest that what may seem like a small step towards addressing climate change will in fact reduce significantly the number of cars that visit our park this summer. Hundreds, if not thousands of cars will not enter Stanley Park as a result. In this way, carbon emissions will be reduced. This is important. There are other positive impacts as well. Not everyone owns and operates a car, whether for economic, environmental, or health reasons. Those park visitors deserve options to enable them to enjoy the park. Accessibility is key. As well, the peace and tranquility of the park will be enhanced. This is beneficial for human visitors as well as for wildlife inhabitants of the park. Finally, we all know that since COVID cases began to appear in our province, ridership on transit has dropped precipitously. The well-being of our city requires a robust and well-used transit system. We will win new riders and win back old ones by attractive and popular bus service. Bring back the Round the Park bus. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Connie, for your presentation. I think that Jeff, did you want to make any comments with respect to the issues that Connie has raised?
Hey, Tony, I think
Hi.
there's some other delegates that are going to speak to that topic. Maybe after the other delegates, then we could have Jeff respond to that topic, if that's okay.
Yeah, I was just passed a note that I think the other delegates are not available. So I'll
Okay.
ask one more time just in case. John, are you there? And then the other delegate who was going to speak on this was Nathan. I'm not sure if Nathan. Yes, hello? Is that Nathan? Yeah, it looks like those two other delegates were not able to join us. So at this time, maybe Jeff, if you have any thoughts.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello, who is that?
Hi, it's John Irwin. I'm having trouble. I was muted and I couldn't, no matter how many times I clicked my button, I couldn't get unmuted. My apologies.
Okay, well, we can hear you. We can hear you now, John. So why don't you go ahead and do your presentation?
Great. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for all your effort and work during this, troubling time. All your heavy lifting. We in the public really appreciate it. I'm calling to ask for to see if you can look at ways to increase transit access to Stanley Park. This could include, more number 19 service or possibly articulated buses on that service. I don't know if the loop will accommodate that though, so that is just an aside. My understanding is there was a bus that was to be put in service from Main Street to Stanley Park, and it was to start a bit earlier. I'm just asking if it can be started sooner to get people into the park by transit as our venues open up there, and that perhaps the Blue Bus system could set up some stops along the causeway, not the express buses, of course, but the other buses, to let people off on the causeway at various points along there, which would both serve North Vancouver and West Vancouver residents, but also people coming out of the city who could use that service. The other thing is, I think historically in the 1970s and 80s, there was a route that ran, at least in the peak season, around the park, operated by TransLink. So I'm hoping we can look at something like that again, where you could highlight perhaps a hybrid bus or maybe one of these new fully electric buses that some systems are running. And so I just wanted to pass that along. Also, I read a piece this week that Edmonton had moved to eliminating fares for younger people, 18 and younger. So I hope you can think about doing that as well. I know you're going to be having ridership issues and budget issues as we are on the park board, but I think it can be a way to increase transit ridership and ease amongst the young, and also create a new cohort or group of riders that will take the system in the future. Thanks for your time today.
Great, thank you very much, John. Appreciate your comments. And I know we have one other speaker on this topic, and I'm hoping that Nathan, you're able to you connect right now. Nathan, are you there? I'm not sure, Nathan, if you're still on mute, but we can't really hear you.
Hello?
Yes, Nathan?
Hello? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you, Nathan. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Still on mute, but we can't really hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect, Nathan. Why don't you go ahead then and make your comments?
Hello?
Yes, Nathan?
Yes. Hello? Yes? Yes, hello.
We can hear you, Nathan. Can you hear us?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Still on mute, but we can't really hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect, Nathan. Why don't you go ahead then and make your comments? Yes, Nathan?
Yes. Just a minute. Oh. Yes. Okay, hello? Yeah, so you can hear me okay now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Nathan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just supporting Commissioner John Elvin request, which is an urgent request. And we are not asking for any extra money. The money is already in the budget of Coast Mountain Bus Company. They have money in the budget for 6 additional buses starting May 18. And they didn't start those 6 additional buses to Stanley Park on May 18. So there's actually more money than the 6 buses. It's just a matter of starting those buses instead of Main Street SkyTrain stations, start them at Georgia and Granville. So they serve the 2 SkyTrain stations, City Center and Granville, way more ridership. And they can go into from there to Stanley Park and then go around the park and then come back to Granville and Georgia. So the money's in the budget. It's just a matter of reallocating it and putting it in place to go around the park. And I mean, this is a 1,000-acre park and over 10 million visitors a year. And it's not possible for everybody to access all the 1,000 acres unless there is a bus that takes them around the perimeter of the park, the round the park bus service that existed for over 50 or 60 years. And that's what needs to be done urgently for this summer as soon as possible. And so I mean, that's my main point. And I mean, there's other cost-saving measures that Coast Mountain Bus Company is wasting money left, right, and center, millions of dollars. And that was pointed out by the 2013 Ministry of Finance report from BC Minister of Finance report with 27 recommendations to save money. And as far as I know, most of those recommendations were never implemented. So the money is there, just provide the service for the people who need it. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nathan, for your comments. I think this is the last of the speakers who are speaking on this topic. And I think, Jeff, you were going to provide some comments back.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Connie, Nathan, and John, who spoke on this. We have been having some preliminary discussions with City of Vancouver. Yes, we did used to run a service, the number 52, I'm informed, but it ended in 1998 that went around the park. There are a number of issues I know which the board and the public is very aware of right now. Well, certainly our intention is to serve these places that are having higher demand, like parks. And I recently biked around Stanley Park, and it's amazing to see the number of people that are trying to access it at this time. Obviously, we are deploying all of our services, 100% of them right now, to try and serve and support the restart economy. So anything that we were to do at this point would require us to redeploy buses and operators, because we are using all of our operators and all of our buses on the existing routes and system that we have right now. So the money or the people or the vehicles aren't there to actually move this summer on something like this. As Kevin pointed out in his earlier remarks at the AGM, the theme of providing access to recreational facilities and environmental treasures around the region is really high, and it's something that we are exploring and want to look at. we'll have to work with you and with the City of Vancouver and the Parks Board and see how we would actually do this, because there are lots of logistical things too, even if we did have the resources, whether it's about stripping parking or making sure we had turnaround areas, et cetera, things that would require some physical work as well. But we agree with the general idea about increasing and improving services and providing multimodal access to these really large areas. It's just going to take some time and additional resources which aren't right now available.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff. We'll now go to our last speaker, Joe Kunstler. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing that right. Joe, are you able to hear us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can hear you just fine this morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. So why don't you go ahead, Joe?
All right, I started my timer. Good morning, Joe Kunstler here. I am a 12 for Transit and also Transit Geek Joe in the Twitters. It was me who placed the cue on eliminating all male panels earlier. I have a lot of thoughts just from my Skagit perch. I woke up to you /TransLink for more than geographic reasons. TransLink is without a doubt the smart kid in the room with a story to tell. I mean, you guys at TransLink, with help from Dr. Bonnie Henry, put COVID-19 on the back foot. And clearly you should name a transit vehicle after Dr. Henry to tell Dr. Henry's story. But despite tides of inhumane, evil racism, who came in the fight to save TransLink in its darkest hour and won? Oh, Bo and Ma. You know, the best MLA in the game. The superhero who decided to put down the Barbie doll and pick up a Blanetaurus action figure. Some call her Badass Bowen as a result. I swear, and I believe you want to fight racism, but if you want to fight racism, if you deserve this chance of pulling through COVID-19, and I think you do, then tell Bo and Ma's story. Name a train after her. You should also name a train the Van Keller train after the best podcast in the game, the Sarah Ross Express after the best transit planner in the game, who deserves a lot more airtime than zero during any future mayor's council presentation on playing the biggest COVID-19, because you need to put your best players forward. And I'm a guy, I'm not getting a sex change operation, and I firmly believe that women make transit better than guys like me, because they look at more than the equipment. They look at the whole setting. They look at how things work for community, like Dr. Josipa Perchinek of Kutrick said, you know, in her keynote yesterday, that more women than men ride transit. That's also something worth noting. You should also wrap a vehicle in the world famous Jada Stevens transit maps that your agency creates. And yes, Jada Stevens is the best map maker in the game. And of course, a Canada Line train after Gordon Campbell for his genius with the Canada Line. It is frankly my favorite SkyTrain to ride because I love watching airplanes, and you literally have a sexy SkyTrain station minutes away from the best place to watch YVR flight operations. Those are all stories worth telling. Stand tall and proud. Your diversity is a strength, not a weakness. Frankly, as Badass Bowen can tell you, I look to TransLink as a font for new ideas. Corley, you need to promote and share your cunning solutions to COVID-19 and regaining ridership, as you are doing so well. Maybe you should instruct staff to write a few books for the TransLink store and Kindle also. We here believe in public transit as a vital tool to address climate change, address racism and sexism. And as such, TransLink should refrain from all male panels to the Mayor's Council, make action figures of your staff, and also you really should, again, continue to share your smart ideas, because the world is coming to Vancouver. It came last September for Rail Evolution, which seems like a decade away when it was only last September. And the world will keep coming because you're smart and you're diverse and you're courageous and you deserve the public, the regional support you're getting. And I hear people honking horns, celebrating TransLink's many accomplishments. And you deserve to be celebrated as if you won the Stanley Cup, because unlike the Canucks, you actually stand a chance at winning things. I have about a minute left. So I want to thank you so much for allowing me to call in today and hopefully raise a few spirits down in TransLink headquarters. You can rest assured we in Washington State are in a tough slog to save our transits, but you inspire us. You continue to inspire us every day. And we will pull through this because we have a Northern Star, and that Northern Star resides in the North Shore and that Norfolk Star's name is Bowen Ma. Please honor her, and please don't forget all your other heroes as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. We appreciate your comments and we appreciate your support of TransLink. And thank you for making the time to share those with us today. So that is the last of our speakers. So I think we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is our executive reports. And Kevin, I think we're starting with you first with your report to the board.
Thanks, Tony, and I will be briefer this time than the AGM. You've heard a lot from me. We have other business to attend. I just have a few short items. So, ridership has been obviously something that we've been thinking enormously about since March 20th, and the fate of our ridership, seeing the enormous decline. By April, our ridership was off throughout the system by about 83%, hitting a daily low of 233,000 boardings. Now, before COVID, we were at 1.5 million boardings a day. And back to one of the Slido questions that we responded to about the effectiveness of our system, I just want to reinforce our system, given the size of our metropolitan regions, is incredibly effective at carrying people and attracting market share. And as I mentioned in the other remarks, that was something like 75,000 people, those 233,000 trips. Now, since the BC Restart Plan was announced and implemented on May 19th, we have seen an increase in ridership. We expected that. Our Safe Operating Action Plan anticipated that, and that was a very, very significant component of developing the plan and working with the Public Health and WorkSafe BC. So as of Friday of last week, average daily ridership is more like 472,000. So in effect, we've doubled the ridership. That's a good thing, but that's still only about 69% of pre-COVID. So people are coming back. Last week, the trend line actually flattened out a little bit. Don't know exactly why. It might have had to do with it was a rainier period, and the period before that was really, really good weather. But we do know that the province is shortly, we hope, going to move to phase 3 of the restart plan, and that we would anticipate will bring another component of ridership going forward. We're monitoring this each and every day. We have a really good daily and weekly report from our team, from Jeff's group, our analysts, watching this very, very carefully. We certainly want to continue to provide the necessary mobility to folks. I want to just once again remind folks, please, if you can, wear a mask, wash your hands, don't touch your eyes and mouth, maybe carry some hand sanitizer with you, but all very important notes. So to the Safe Operating Action Plan that we announced fully a few weeks ago, and you saw my slide, the sort of nice pink wearing is caring concept. The Safe Operating Action Plan has 4 components: cleaning and sanitizing measures throughout the system, restoring service levels. We are operating for the most part 100% of our pre-COVID service hours, with the exception of West Coast Express and C-Bus. Handy Dart ridership and demand still has not fully come back, but we will be there to respond to demand as it emerges. Managing physical space on the system has been very, very important, and making the recommendations to our customers. Last Thursday, we announced publicly that we're expanding the availability of hand sanitizer dispensers throughout the station at SkyTrain stations and on our rapid buses. It's on the bus side, and in fact, it's a bit of a pilot. We want to see how well it works, how people use it, what the maintenance and operations issues are associated with it. But folks will begin to see that roll out in the weeks ahead. Already, a few stations in the system already had hand sanitizer stations. Just Monday, we announced our Wearing is Caring campaign. As I said in response to the question during the AGM, we'll be handing out something like 15,000 TransLink branded masks by street teams throughout the system. Our TransLink News Twitter account will share the location and times of day for each of the giveaways. So people should certainly stay tuned. And later on in the summer, we'll be making those masks as well available on the TransLink store. We will not be selling it for a profit. I want to mention something else to change the topic just a little bit. But one of the things that it is worthwhile trying to do during this time of significantly reduced ridership is taking advantage and maybe accelerate some maintenance and capital work on the system, that way minimizing the impact to customers that we otherwise are always trying to work around. So a few examples of that. We've accelerated the installation of our passenger information displays at the SkyTrain stations. So that's been helpful to accelerate the schedule for those installations, as well the installation and upgraded PA speakers at SkyTrain stations and CCT cameras. BC Hydro upgrades at the Breakhouse Loop in Richmond is moving along a little bit faster, and additional work on SkyTrain running rail, in part because of the lack of hockey games late in the season, has enabled us SkyTrain to expedite some of that work. We announced, I think just a couple of weeks ago now, we're taking advantage of lower demand at the waterfront station to accelerate the replacement of the very old escalators on the east end of the SkyTrain, the Expo line portion of the station. So the east end is now closed off. The escalators are being removed. The staircases are also closed off, and the elevator is not available. So folks do have to walk around. We have a shuttle bus for people with disabilities to get to Burrard Station. The stairs and the elevator will be reopened in 2 or 3 weeks, and the escalator should be fully installed in the fall. But we're able to get this done a lot faster than we otherwise would have. So we appreciate the patience of our customers, but I think this is just a great example of trying to get some things done a little bit faster and more efficiently now when the impact is a little bit less. Lastly, I just want to reflect on our financial situation. Of course, we are still bleeding money. We're still looking at extremely significant deficits. You'll get a presentation shortly from Chris Dacre and Jeff Cross and an update on our scenarios forecasting the deficits. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister made an announcement of $14.8 billion that would be made available to the provinces for emergency relief for a whole range of purposes, very, very important purposes, obviously for our communities. But we were heartened that both the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister in their announcements specifically mentioned that those funds should also be available to support transit throughout the country. So we're hopeful that working closely with the province in connection of the BC Restart Plan and our current operations of full service, that we will eventually find a portion of that emergency relief will help fill a portion of the gap that will otherwise significantly undermine our ability to maintain full services and our capital program going into next year. You'll hear more about that from Jeff and Chris. So I'll close with that, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Kevin. So if there's any questions from the board, if you can use the raise hands feature, and we'll open it up to questions for Kevin. Does anyone have any questions? I'm not seeing any raised hands, so I'm hoping that feature is working. So if that's the case, we'll just move on to our next item on the agenda, which is Michelle, you're going to give us a report with respect to BC Rapid Transit.
I would be happy to, Mr. Chairman. I assume that everybody can hear me. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So this was definitely a very turbulent quarter. We should almost forget about it, but we had some severe snow in January, and then towards the end of March, we had started feeling the impact of COVID-19. I will go through to 6 topics about how we have been doing and what we're expecting to do in future. Next slide, please. So safety is always our first topic. It's kind of our credo within BCRTC. I launched the Zero Harm campaign, which is an active campaign because zero harm is about an outcome. That's what we would like to achieve for our employees. In the first quarter, I spoke to large groups of our frontline staff and people within the business to tell them the importance of zero harm and making sure that we take measures that ensures that people can go home uninjured and unharmed and see their families and friends in the same state as they left. We've been focusing on those departments that had the highest potential of improvement, and we made some good successes there. For instance, the guideway department hasn't seen a long-term injury for more than 5 months. And that overall has improved our statistics, which we will see in the next slide. Occupational health is a core concern for us. A little bit about it further on. And obviously we haven't relaxed on our station and train campaigns. Obviously COVID-19 has added an extra flavor to what we were already doing, and we'll continue focusing on safety around in the new normal. Next slide, please. So this gives us a number of stats. Basically, this is a good news story. We've shown improvements in both passenger injuries as well as in lost time claims, respectively a 23% drop and an 11% drop. As I said before, particularly those lost time claims is because we started focusing on those departments that had the highest potential to improve, and Guideway was one of those departments where we saw relatively many claims, and they haven't had a claim in the last 5 months. Most of the passenger injuries are around slip, trips and falls, basically because people are running or are walking up and down the escalators, bumping into each other. And almost 64% of our passenger injuries were related to slips, trips and falls. 24% of our injuries were related to emergency braking. And then we had a small group of people who tripped or were showing signs of intoxication. Our focus on the next quarter would be on further improving slips, trips and falls, and also on mental health. Mental health is a industry trend where you see that not so much the number of instances increases, but the time that people are off has increased. So for instance, in 2019, we lost on average 125 days to mental health, and it has now increased to 197 days on mental health. And our strategy is very much on understanding where the risk is coming from, understanding what our organizational needs are, the reasons behind mental health issues, but also on how we can educate and help people to overcome mental health issues and return back to work. Next slide, please. Our on-time performance has been a mixed bag. As you can see, we were hit hard in January, where our overall on-time performance was 84.6%. We gradually recovered and have shown very good performance in March and April. March, we were still mainly operating a normal service. April was helped by the fact that we saw fewer customers. We're still around 96% in May, not quite the target we have set ourselves of 96.5%, but it's going steady. In June is looking good. The May dip just below was not helped, was caused by a situation on the Millennium Line. The good thing is we are currently piloting a real-time performance dashboard, which shows you on an hour-by-hour basis how we're doing and where delays are coming from. That's currently available. internally for people to look at, and it's very promising because I truly believe that something that everybody within our business needs to know, because we're very much related to the customer experience, and knowing how we're doing at any time during the day is important to keep that mindset and that focus. Fortunately, our customer satisfaction survey in the first quarter was only slightly below our target of 8.3. Basically, more than 80% of the customers are still thinking that we're providing a good or excellent service, despite their experience in January. Next slide, please. This shows a little bit why we did not well in January. This basically compares our performance to the same period last year and how we did. And what you can see is that we lost 25.4% of our punctuality to weather. And this is both cancellations and on-time performance. And it's mainly the cancellations that we experienced that led to this deep decrease in our service provision. As you know, when we experience weather, we have to go to manual driving, and that doesn't allow us to have the same headway. So that's the main reason why we have lower performance. The other one is door issues. No surprise there. Doors tend to freeze up during winter period, and this is an ongoing concern, and we're still looking into it and how to improve them. Next slide, please. The Mark III service. Currently, we have 64 trains in service across the network. The Mark IIIs came in 3 batches. The first 2 batches are now in service. It's about 15 trains, and we are. And currently, the good news is that all trains have arrived in Canada from the United States and are either in the testing or commissioning phase or in the phase where they're being put together. So I'm well confident that we will have all those trains in service by the end of this year. Next slide, please. Capital projects. Despite COVID-19, we could continue with our capital projects. Some of those capital projects have only slowed down marginally, but basically we could maintain what we were doing. The good news is we are building we are planning to build a new control center in future, and we just finalized our 30% design review and submitted building permit to the city of Burnaby. It's all looking good. We're working through the permitting process. In the end, if this building is finished, not only are we set for the future of SkyTrain, but it will also be the beating heart of SkyTrain. And I think that's a feather in the head of Burnaby that they will have the beating heart of SkyTrain in their city boundaries. We also went out to market for acquiring 205 new cars, SkyTrain cars, to replace the Mark I's and the Mark II's, but also to accommodate future demand. Recently, we've had proposals from 2 bidders, and we're currently going through the review process before we publish a final choice. And Kevin already mentioned it. We brought forward the replacement of the Expo Line escalators at Waterfront. Those escalators are 30 years old, heavily used by all kinds of people using all modes of public transport almost within Vancouver. They really were up for renewal. Our planning team, also due to fortunate foresight, were able to bring this whole program forward from fall to spring. And because we see lower numbers of passengers, it's actually good for everyone, because not only do we have new escalators, but we also don't affect as many passengers as we would have. Next slide, please. Furthermore, around the customer experience, we now have a live app that shows us the status of every escalator in around the network. This is something that SkyTrain attendants can use to inform customers and to be aware of where there's problems. We're also working with the team to equip STAs with wireless microphones that allows them to to make immediate announcements whilst they're roving the platforms. This will help us to give accurate and on-time information whenever it's needed. It will help us during COVID-19 to advise people to keep their distance. And it will also help us to improve safety and warn people of slip, trips and falls. So this is a very good development. Next slide, please. Many people might have seen this already when they travel the network, but these are a few examples of what we're doing across the network to keep people safe. From having decals that advises people to keep their distance, putting in decals on platforms to allow a safe corridor for people to exit the train and leave the station without walking into other people, to having hand sanitizers at key stations so people, most of our people can wash their hands before entering or after leaving a train station. Obviously, we're encouraging people to wear masks and make sure that they can travel safely when they enter the network. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide. This shows the people who've been working tirelessly over the last few months to keep BCRTC going and make sure that people can enjoy our service and will be enjoying our service in the near future. Thank you, Chairman.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Before we go to questions from Michelle, I just want to turn to Lorraine. I have to apologize because your green hand didn't show up on my screen, but I understand you had a question for Kevin. Lorraine?
I did, but it also came up in Michelle, so I can just talk about it now. I just wanted to talk about the grinding and also the accelerating of the escalators. So Michelle, in addition to this report, you gave a very good 8-page report that the board had read. So I just wanted to talk about the grinding a little bit and see whether that machine that was that had broken down is now back up and running, and you're back doing grinding and accelerating that process as well.
Yes, so noise mitigation is our constant attention. And as you may remember, is that last year we started this noise mitigation program, which basically means is that we take a measure of 75 decibels at the facade of the nearest building. And if we don't meet that standard, then we're trying to reduce noise. So what we've already done around the network is, for instance, put in harder steel whenever we replace the railways. We have acoustic grinding going on that helps us to reduce sound. Wherever it's necessary, we've put in dampers in critical locations. And we're working with builders to see if we can change the code that will help people experience less noise. Currently, we have had more complaints. The thing is, what we try to do the right thing here. Normally, our grinding program is mainly focused on the second half of this year, and this year we brought the whole program forward to spring, and that was with the help of a contractor from the USA. Unfortunately, when they were about to start in April, we had COVID-19, and that contractor wasn't available anymore. Unfortunately, at the same time, our own grinder broke down, and that's currently being repaired, and we are hoping to have that back within the next couple of weeks. So we will continue to grind in those locations where people experience noise. We will continue with the noise mitigation program to see to limit the worst, to mitigate the noise in the worst affected areas. And at the same time, we will roll out our full grinding program as it was envisaged later this year.
Thank you. And then the piece that I was going to ask you and Kevin is about the hand sanitizers, and just I understand whenever these are put in public places that they tend to disappear because they're very dear product that's in the hand sanitizer. So I'm just wondering if that's an experience that we're having where we're installing them.
We're currently looking at new hand sanitizers. The ones that we've put in place now are the hand sanitizers were kind of quickly leased to provide the service. We're currently looking at more professional, if that's the right word, sanitizers that we can actually bolt onto the floor in key locations at key stations, and they should provide a better service. Yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lorraine. Marcella, I see you have your hand up next.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Thanks for that report, Michelle, the additive report, as well as what we've read before the meeting. Just a couple of comments, really, rather than questions. First of all, I just want to say that the snow seems so long ago. It's funny to refer to snow and the impact on operations with everything that has happened since then. It's really good of you to remind us about that and the learnings that you and your team will take from it into the future teams. Safety and health. You gave us some good reports on it. Are you feeling that your progress on the safety is moving as expected, better? Are you feeling you're missing anything at this point in time? You're comfortable with the progress on improving the safety?
I would like to go faster with this on this one. And I feel that COVID has focused, very much focused the minds on zero harm and not hurting your colleagues. But I would have liked to go a little bit faster and make it part of the Just Culture program. The good thing is that we have really improved our standards. So we're currently, as you can read in the report, we have worked on our standards and our safety management system. And we're also working with Technical Safety BC to improve our safety management system. And that work has all continued. In the end, it's all about behavior and setting the right example. And that requires continuous coaching. And that's an ongoing program. So am I pleased? Yeah, I'm neutral in this one because I would have liked to go fast. I'm not disappointed.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marcella. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michelle, for that excellent report. I just had a question related to the new SMS industry-wide standards that are expected from Technical Safety BC. And I just wondered whether we expect to see much impact on the way we do things as a result of that.
Yes, it will have. It's as I understand it right now, it's a standard that was copied from the airline industry, which basically means that it uses different categories and it forces us to look more at risk than at hazards currently, which I think is a good thing because it's about identifying and containing risk. And when things happen, having safety nets in place to avoid that people are getting hurt. Technical Safety BC haven't finalized that model yet, but it will require some work from us to get it in the right framework. Does it mean that we're currently not doing the right thing? No, it doesn't mean that we're not doing the right thing. It's just that we at some point have to regroup our documents and regroup our thinking and apply a new structure.
Great. Look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karen. So I don't see any more hands up at this point in time. So Michelle, thank you very much for your report. It's great to see the progress on the safety, and we really appreciate the work that you and your team are doing, particularly during the last few months as we've managed through this pandemic. So I'm going to turn to our next speaker, Mike McDaniel, who's the President and General Manager of the Coast Mountain Bus Company. Mike, can you go ahead, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and members of the public listening in live. Next slide, please. So today, I'm going to take everybody through a couple of things. First on safety, of course, and then we'll look at a couple of KPIs there. We'll move to our response and recovery related to the COVID-19 crisis. And then, of course, there is a normal world out there that is going on outside of COVID as well. And we have a project update related to farebox replacement and an introduction at the end as well. Next slide, please. So the first slide you see up here is focused on our employees. It's specifically on operator assaults. As you see there, it is Q1 2016 through 2020 inclusive as a comparison. And as you see, our number for Q1 2020, a little bit lower than Q1 of 2019. As a reminder to the board, we did see Q1 of 2019 being obviously fairly high relative to comparison from years before. When we reported that back to the board a year ago, we were putting a number of things in place at the time. We anticipated that number would come down. In fact, it did. it came down to being actually a record low for 2019. So we're watching 2020 as well. One of the things that is a little bit counterintuitive on this slide is that despite the fact that it looks better than last year, the rate for service hours looks a little bit better. It didn't come down relative to customer boardings. Customer boardings obviously declined dramatically, but our assaults did not decline as rapidly. The major contributor to that really is that as part of our response in the early stages of the crisis, we changed from a front door boarding model to a rear door boarding. We suspended fares at the time. We did this to provide more distance for passengers that were boarding the bus and alighting the bus from our operators. What that did do, though, is it did have an effect on how much control, how much view we had of the bus, individuals boarding the bus. And in cases, despite support from transit security and transit supervisors, our operators did have to deal with passengers that were problematic at times, including individuals that had fallen asleep on the bus. Some of those cases obviously resulted in unfortunate assaults, and that's why we've seen that climb despite ridership being lower. Now, the good news on this is that as one of the initiatives that we did, we accelerated the installation of the permanent operator protection barriers. And so I'm happy to report that on May 11th, we finished actually 100% of the 918 buses that we had originally targeted. That was expedited by approximately a year, and we installed those early. In addition to that, as part of both the rear door boarding early in the crisis, as well as part of our recovery on June 1st when we restored the front door, maintenance, operations, and of course our union worked together to design even greater barriers, temporary barriers, extensions for the buses that had the permanent operator protection barriers on them, and for those that did not, a vinyl protection barrier to ensure that our operators were guarded from the spread of COVID-19 while they were doing their jobs, driving the revenue vehicles. So that was a great feat, and we've had lots of positive feedback from our team coming back from that. Next slide, please. So moving from obviously our employee side to our customer side, you see the next slide here. Same comparison data, Q1 2016 through to Q1 2020. This slide is a little bit more intuitive. It does follow the line of a decreased ridership, decreased traffic on the roads, decreased motor vehicle issues, and we've seen our onboard injury claims decrease as part of that. Obviously, with more traffic on the roads, there are at times what we call a hard brake. That is a bus stopping abruptly to avoid either pedestrians, cyclists, other motor vehicles on the road. We've obviously had less of those and therefore less incidents of anybody falling on the bus if they were not holding on at the time. Next slide, please. So just moving to COVID-19 response, this is an incredible summary, really, of all the things that have changed on the bus system over the last few months. So highlights, I think, is probably a really good description. First and foremost, we looked at our cleaning and disinfecting regimen. We went from a 30-day cycle down to a 7-day cycle early on in the response. This was in addition to our daily cleans each night as the buses come back in for the night. We, as mentioned before, we switched to rear door boarding and fare suspension. We looked at strategic cancellations, and what I mean by that is a variety of routes that really saw a more dramatic drop off, saw cancellations, and where we could, we redistributed those to areas that didn't see as much of a drop in demand. We still have had that up until we restored full service over the last number of weeks. You saw some of the pictures in Michelle's presentation in regards to physical distancing. A lot of the bus loops as well have decals and signage. Staff also on site, making sure people stay physically distanced. And of course, we reduced the capacity on the bus in the early stages to a half-seated load maximum. when we look at other things that we did, the red line on the bus for customers to stand behind, we moved that further back to get more distance from passengers to our staff. And again, throughout it, we focused on our employees, whether it be through daily communications of either training or updates, policy changes, operational changes, or just information about what was going on, all the way to probably one of the largest examples, which was a significant support from occupational health that CMBC does for many parts of the enterprise. And that group really did some heavy lifting, to say the least, during those last few months. Next slide, please. As we move from response to recovery, as mentioned earlier, we've now reached near normal service levels on almost every route that we have service on. June 1st was kind of a little bit of the demarcation of our recovery. It did restore the front door boarding as well as fare collection. Of late, we've been distributing masks to our frontline employees, and actually we've just started distributing that to our many of our support employees as well. Again, different aspects of promoting physical distancing. And then, believe it or not, we do have staff that are moving on. They're moving on either through retirement or to other jobs. And so actually Monday of this week, we restored our operator training and recruitment, because we do need to obviously keep up with our employee levels, so we can keep up with the service levels on the road going forward as well. And then for approximately 300 of our staff that did what we asked them to do, stayed home, worked from home where they could, we are working in a coordinated approach with the rest of the enterprise to bring those employees back to their normal work sites over the next number of months. Phase 1 of that has started. Phase 2 won't start until closer to September. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, besides the day-to-day of the last number of months, we do have normal projects going on as well. This obviously is one of them, fare box replacement project. As you may know, our cubic electronic fare boxes on our conventional fleet have very much reached their end of life. And so starting in July, we will be replacing those with the tag mechanical fare boxes. These are the same fare boxes that we have installed, as you see in the picture there, on our shuttle fleet. You actually, if you can see it, you can see the vinyl barrier in the background as well there in that picture. Now, these have gone very well on the shuttle fleet this last year. What this means is the integrity of our fare box revenue is better. We have less breakdowns and therefore less times where we are closing off that fare box. A lot less moving parts in this mechanical fare box, and so we're looking forward to that project starting and coming to fruition. It starts in July, as you see on the slide there, and it runs all the way through to the end of 2021, in which case the entire fleet, 1,500 revenue vehicles, will be replaced with those. Transit operators have been involved, as well as transit supervisors, in engagement around that, as well as they'll be involved in training going forward with this new procedure. Next slide, please. Now, if we were live, we would be doing this more in person, of course, but I did want to just take a moment to introduce Roger Gilles. He's our new Executive Director of Finance and Corporate Services. Roger joined us from various backgrounds, restaurant industry, tourism industry, and of late in manufacturing. He's a CPA with a CMA designation. And among other things, he's a champion for continuous improvement and lean. And that means he will fit in very well here. Now, he started on March 23rd, right in the middle of all of this. So he has been remotely meeting a lot of people, obviously being involved in a number of these day-to-day meetings and planning meetings for the future. So just wanted to offer him a welcome aboard, and I know he looks forward to meeting members of the board in person at a future date. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide as well. As Michelle said, as Kevin said off the top, this is our team. 6,000 of our people at Coast Mountain Bus Company. They have been the ones on the front lines. They've been the ones in the support roles. They've been the ones that have made our system run day in and day out, night in and night out. They deserve a tremendous amount of thanks and appreciation. They literally have been the backbone of the system, and I do want to take the opportunity to thank them, to congratulate them on stepping up, leaning in, and getting the job done. As Kevin said before, we don't have an opportunity to press the pause button. We have to keep going, and we did. And our 6,000 employees at Coast Mountain Bus Company definitely stepped up. And so a big thank you to every single one of our team. That concludes my report, members of the board. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. There are a few questions, so I'll start with Larry first.
Thank you. And I really want to echo your last comment. I've been hearing a lot of customers who are just so impressed at the employees and the people, the drivers, and everyone that they come in contact with who in these very difficult times have been helpful and all of that. So it really is a very positive statement about the attitudes of our staff and our teams to do best in difficult times. One red flag in your report for me when I read it was this troublesome thing that even when boardings were down, assaults of employees were up. And related to that, I just have two questions. One is, do you contemplate doing more than you've done even now to try to respond to that issue of assaults? I think even one assault is too many. And secondly, is there any kind of area pattern, geographical pattern to this assault, or is it just random through the system? And what is the nature of these assaults? Are they really damaging? Are they mostly verbal? Are they all physical? A little bit more about that. I think we should put more emphasis on how we can bring those numbers down.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And it's unfortunately a great topic to talk about because we spend a lot of time on it. The answer to your question of should we be doing more, can we do more? Yes, absolutely. Most of our assaults actually are happening in the city of Vancouver and actually in the downtown East Side area. We do have a project that we're working in collaboration with the City of Vancouver, Transit Police, Vancouver Police, and others that is targeting ways that we can mitigate that as well. That is in process right now. I would say probably we're in the middle of that, not quite near the end, but we've started it as of probably about a year ago. So we're going to continue to work through that. Originally when we looked at, as I mentioned before, we have 918 vehicles that we have now equipped. That was our original plan, and it was based on a certain retirement date of the buses. What we want to now do, I think we've seen we've seen everything through a different lens. Obviously, we all have. And now we're going back and we're going to look back and see if the decisions that we made about how many protection barriers we were putting up, what we were doing for training, what we're doing for communication, de-escalation training for our staff, everything. We're looking back on to see if we need to tweak any of that. What I think we're still kind of in the crisis, but we've had initial thoughts on that. And I think we do feel that we need to tweak some of the decisions that we've made. And probably at a later date, I can provide that in the report back to the board to kind of close that loop a bit. But good question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just pleased to hear that you are very actively responding. That's really what I wanted to hear. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Lorraine?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mike, for your report. I also wanted to echo some of the, appreciation for not just all the workers, but the overall leadership of management and the unions that worked so collaboratively together while you were going through a difficult time of, do we have the money? Are we laying people off? We're bringing people back. It was a very difficult time for everyone. And I just wanted to say how much we appreciate the collaboration that went on during that time to get where we are today. And that's all behind us now, hopefully. and just how much we appreciate, you know, when everyone's out banging pots at 7 o'clock for the healthcare workers, I felt like I was doing it for all of the workers that were on the buses at the time and driving everybody around and getting people and all the workers at the SkyTrain station. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Lorraine. Harj?
Thank you, Tony. Mike, first of all, great job, and congratulations to your team for continuing to doing such a great job. I just wanted to have a question around you know, the cleaning, and as the boardings increase, as the traffic increases on the lines, are we able to keep up with the cleanliness? Are you hearing any concerns from our customers about that? I know we're doing a lot of public campaigns as well, you know, around safety, but this is, you know, especially with our frontline workers being there every single day, I'm just concerned that are we doing? Do you feel we're doing enough around that issue?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, Harj. And you know, this is an evolving thing. So to say that we're where we are today and we'll stay here, I wouldn't obviously say that. But what I will say is that it has evolved over time. As I mentioned in my report, in the early part of the response phase, we were able to go from 30 days to every 7 days, sanitizing the entire fleet, 1,500 buses, C buses, and in the response, going from response to recovery, we were able to also source more product as well. So we actually now are doing that twice a week, every Tuesday night, every Friday night. The entire fleet gets sprayed down with a full sanitizing spray. Actually, what you see in your top left-hand corner there of your screen. There's much more that we're doing, of course, in our facilities as well for all of our staff. But this is evolving. So I do think that we have a good handle on it right now. I think we get a lot of good comments, but it's something that we want to keep our finger on the pulse to see if we need to change something, increase something, and we'll continue to do that. It's a very live topic every single day, as you can imagine.
Great, thank you, Harj. Andy?
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Mike, for your report, both your verbal and written. A couple of things that hopefully just quick responses. I just want to pick up where Larry started on the assaults. I'm just wondering if there is targets we always measure. Do we anticipate with the more rapid installation of the protection barriers that this in and of itself will see reductions in passenger assault? So that's one question. The next, I think, as everybody's going through this epidemic and we're seeing unprecedented people out of jobs, it's encouraging to hear you report that we are starting hiring again. Maybe you could just touch on how many jobs you think to year end will become available. I'm sure there's lots of people out in the community that will be eager to hear that. And then briefly in your written report, there was two things that just kind of piqued my curiosity. One, the issue with the Wi-Fi on the battery electric buses. It's the first I've heard of that. I'm just wondering what the status on that is. And maybe finally, you could just give us, maybe anecdotally, even what kind of reception the double deckers are having in service with the customers that are using them. So I know it's a kind of shotgun scattergun there, but again, thank you for your report, and thanks to all of the staff for the amazing work they've done in the last couple of months.
Thanks, Andy. In regards to your question on assaults, you know, in the lead up to March, we did see some indications at each of our depots where we had more of our operator protection barriers installed, and we actually did see a material difference in the number of assaults. And of course, we were only part way in the installation project at the time, but we did see those indications, and so it is our expectation that we will see those come down. And as per, you know, the questions earlier from Larry, that's why I think we need to relook at potentially how either what we're doing relative to barriers or what we're doing elsewhere in our procedures that we have in our training around reducing assaults, because you know, as Larry said, you know, one assault is one too many, and that is our motto. We look at it that way. We've obviously seen some unfortunate circumstances relative to COVID-19 as well, and just the change in how we've operated. But we're again, it's an active conversation. We're looking at a holistic approach versus just one. We don't want to just do barriers. We need to do more than that, and we'll continue to attack that. In regards to recruitment, we have approximately about, say, 200 transit operators from attrition, retire each year, move on. We actually thought that would slow down a bit, but we haven't actually seen that. So what we anticipate from about June till the end of the year is hiring about another 125 operators, putting them through our 6-week training, and getting them on board as part of our team here. So it is good news. It's almost a sign, I think, of a little bit of normalcy too, that we are, continuing our system. We're supporting the BC Restart Plan, and we're going to continue to keep this region moving for all of the many reasons that they need to. Andy, if you can remind me the last 2 questions in your shotgun blast as you described it.
Yeah, sorry about that, Mike. Yeah, just the issue I noticed in your written report, there was some issues on Wi-Fi with the battery electric, and I'm wondering just what that is, and is that something that other agencies experienced? And lastly, just any feedback you have on the acceptance by passengers on the double-decker services that we've introduced.
Yes, thanks, Andy, for that reminder. So in regards to the QTRIC trial, we have 4 battery electric buses, obviously on the system, 2 Nova, 2 New Flyer. And we have 2 different chargers, ABB and Siemens. The whole idea of this trial was the interoperability testing. Can one bus work on multiple chargers? Can multiple chargers charge different buses? There's a reason why it was a 2.25-year trial. Many other organizations across Canada as well as worldwide are going through these tests right now. One of the challenges, of course, is exactly that, is communication, wireless communication between a bus and a charger. We've had ups and downs as the trial's gone on, probably more ups, but of course we focus more on the downs and try to make sure that the reliability increases, not decreases. And we're going to continue with that. Like I said, we've had a lot of positive results and a lot of positive data. But it is still early days in the trial, and we work with QTRIC across Canada with the other trials that are going on. And in relation to, I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought on the last question.
Just the acceptance from passengers on the double-decker fleet being.
Oh, double-deckers. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so far so good. We've obviously been in a bit of a different outlook right now with COVID-19, but they were a huge success when they started, when they came on. We have all of our 32 save one in revenue service right now. And of course, we have 25 more on their way to complete the full order. And that has been delayed a little bit by COVID-19 across Canada, but not too much at this point in time. So from the new fleet coming in, a huge success so far.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I hate you with so many different topics.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Marcella?
Thank you, Chair. Mike, kudos again to your team. I echo everyone else's comments. A couple of, I only have 2, so you don't have to remember them like me, like Andy's. The first one is just curiosity on the fare box renewal that you're going through. Is that going to include leaving or doing something with the rear door boxes?
So Marcella, there's not a rear door box. There's a rear door reader.
Yeah.
So yeah. So when people are boarding on the buses, the far majority board from the front. They will either tap on the reader and pay their cash fare. For some of our express routes, we do have all door boarding. If they are paying cash, they are required to board through the front door. And so that operation won't change. It's simply just the the type of hardware that we're using will change. Procedures will be the same.
Oh, okay. Your reference in one of your slides was to the cubic. And so I thought, oh, did that affect the rear door? So that clarifies it. Thank you. My second, I wanted to compliment you and the whole team, because I know it takes everyone on what I think has been the excellent communication around what TransLink has been doing, both in terms of retraction, the coming back, communication around safety and health, the cleaning, everything that's going on. And to me, it feels like the communication, the game has really gone up a notch to the public, and I hear this from a number of people. And my question to you, and it may be addressed to others, is do you have any new learnings from your communication practices during this period of time that you might begin to rethink?
Yeah, for just specifically for Coast Mountain Bus, I think one of the challenges that we still have today, but we entered a pandemic with this, is that we have 6,000 staff. Just shy of 4,000 of them are transit operators out their workplaces in their vehicles, driving around the region. It's very difficult to communicate to them on a daily basis. We have some avenues to do that, of course. But I think one of the things we realized is that, and we came up with some types of solutions actually, to some workarounds, I guess, at increasing our communication and things that we weren't doing prior to COVID-19. So we will take those learnings as well as ongoing projects of how do we communicate internally better. I think to your comment around communicating to the public, obviously Steve Anagas and his team at Comms, they're the heavy lifters on that. There's obviously a village in the background that everybody contributes to what we're doing. But I do agree that we've worked much better together across the enterprise. And we've had to, because we all had to step up to deal with the crisis at hand.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marcella. I don't see any other questions for you, Mike. So again, I know a number of board members have obviously started their questions with an appreciation, but I think on behalf of the whole board, I just want to say that we really do appreciate all 6,000 of the employees at Coast Mountain, and particularly the exceptional job they've been doing over the last few months as we've been dealing with this pandemic. So thank you again.
Thank you, Tony.
Our next speaker is David Jones, Chief Officer of the Transit Police. So David, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members, and the public that are listening in. I'm going to start off with next slide, please. Just a brief update on the starting of what was COVID-19 and a couple of factors. One is just ensuring the safety of employees and passengers. As this all started, and I think it's really important to note that the vast majority of people who use transportation, the high percentage, do it in a safe, disruptive manner in that. So as a result, we didn't see an equal correlation of like calls for service drop. Like when we lost 70% of passengers, it didn't see a 70% drop in calls for service in terms of it. We saw drops of about, and I'll touch on it later, of like 11% or 5%, as we still had to contend with issues on and I say the transit system, from the buses, West Coast Express, C-Bus, and the trains. But ensuring the safety of the employees also became important, and spending time around those areas. Equipping our members with the proper personal protection equipment. They didn't, the one thing about being in policing is they didn't have a choice to stop working and going out and having to engage and deal with people who were the subject of complaints. So aligning our policies and getting that equipment was key. We also noticed that the different types of trends of activities had occurred. We had heard of, we saw, and people, it was reported of like break and enters occurring in some cities, a rise in those issues. So we needed to focus some of our attentions around the businesses that occupy station areas. I give like Main Street and that, where we have either businesses right attached or right nearby. So we did a lot of safety in that area as well too, is ensuring that we took time with that. We also, the next one, picture on there just says supporting our policing partners. I mentioned that there was a real shift in things that happened, and that included the movement of individuals, crime trends in different areas, and problems arising that required us to work together. There were some concerns in and around, such as, say, YVR, where we worked with the Richmond RCMP and Vancouver Airport Authority. The Hastings Street area continued to be one of an area of focus for us to work with the Vancouver Police Department, and in general was being relied upon more to really deal with issues from our jurisdictional police agencies on anything in or around the transportation system. I also note the photo on the right demonstrates the members there were wearing red, pieces of red in recognition of the tragic events in Nova Scotia that occurred early in this whole time of COVID pandemics. Next slide. So the considerations during the beginning of COVID were, of course, employee and public health, the safety, business continuity, training, and enforcement. One of the things here is that the health of our employees, both from those in Coast Mountain or BC Rapid Transit or TransLink itself, became very important. Developing new protocols, following of the public health orders became very vital, which also resulted in, beyond equipment, was training. You had to remember that there were public health and safety orders that were coming out that were sometimes needed to be interpreted on a daily basis as a definition of authority, such as those returning to the country at YVR Airport and whether they could use public transit and transportation. And we took a real educational approach to everything. We didn't take a hard enforcement aspect to this. We were very we recognized that they were doing rear door boarding on the buses, and therefore, there wasn't the collection of fares going on. So our role here was to really focus in on public safety, the confidence in those who still needed to use the system of being able to do it safely. The interpretation of the public health orders and Quarantine Act was also very important to us to understand how we could educate those who might be in violation of it or not understanding of it. Some of the tricks, I would say, and changes came as things like social distancing or wearing of masks, even in it continues today, are recommendations. And sometimes people feel uncomfortable when they get on something. And so we were dealing with some conflicts between individuals where somebody thought it might have been an order versus where there was a recommendation in terms of it. Again, our whole role was to resolve and educate at that time. Next slide. Part of this here, you're just seeing, this is a picture of our communication staff, and I'm going to just speak to them about it. We were able to get the vast majority of our internal staff to work from home as a safe place. A lot of credit to the IT group who was able to get them set up and out of here. We've been able to maintain continuity of everything we need, but we do have people such as those who work in communications that have to come to work. We took steps right away to protect their area. There's limited number of people allowed into the communications area. They were the first, I think, throughout the entire organization or enterprise who actually instituted on their own initiative was voluntary temperature tests coming to work. You couldn't enter the room unless you had your temperature checked. They followed the guidelines really well about if you weren't feeling well, what to do, and that. I'm happy to say that, as a matter of fact, that area is fully staffed, and I think it costs us last month only an additional $250 in some shift extension one day to really keep keep the staff levels up, which is a significant turnaround from a year ago, when we weren't even in COVID. So really proud of the staff and the civilian staff who have continued to come to work, and with our sick time and everything being down, and all other civilian staff throughout the organization. Next slide. So part of this, we say the initiatives during the COVID period, there was an integrated Quarantine Act response and support team. And what made the transit police very unique is, one, we do connect to YVR. along with the Richmond RCMP who have responsibility there, but was the individuals who might try to use transit or transit upon leaving. And there was some initial rules or recommendations on not using the system, and our position in being a metro police force throughout the Lower Mainland. And as a result, policing got together. It started with the RCMP, the Vancouver Police, and Transit Police. And the initiative created a quarantine team that could respond by going through the Lower Mainland and following up with individuals who had been identified coming back into the country who may or may not follow their plans. It was a very complex program that was set up, administered by the RCMP Emergency Operations Center, and it has worked out really well. At the beginning of the peak of it, we had 4 members assigned. Again, this was educational. They haven't written any tickets. They haven't arrested anybody, but it was to follow up. It was very positive. A lot of people and neighbors were happy to see a police officer, actually following up, talking to it. Now, not everyone got a personal visit. There were priority 1s to priority 4s as to who was followed up, but it was really well done. We were very fortunate that every member we were able to provide in there had additional language skill sets, which were important. And they were so valuable. At the end of it, we've actually left one person with the program as it cut back, just because of the quality of work that they were doing and the skill sets that they were able to bring there. But it was just part of our response and being part of the regional area as to how we could provide that assistance and protect what I would say is access and the transit system, so that our passengers would know that we were even more engaged in knowing who may or may not should be on the system at any given time. Next slide. Just one thing, we talk about staffing, and I would just point out is that the Justice Institute of BC closed down. We would have placed 6 recruits into a May class. It closed entirely. There was a delay in returning some recruits to get their final training in terms of it. So that class has actually, I'm going to say, has just disappeared. It'll put policing back in terms of numbers of trying to make up for shortages. Shortages we anticipate come through retirement and general attrition of our members. And a brand new recruit these days takes about 10 months to graduate from the academy. So you have to do a lot of pre-planning, and not only in hiring, but then the selection. And then by the time they're fully trained, it's about 10 months later before they graduate out. So tentatively, there is a class 1 start plan for September. And in that, we will be able to meet some of our needs, but not all of the needs for this year, but we've adapted accordingly. Next slide. As you know, there was a lot of support that went out to healthcare workers, and you heard it there too. I think there's a lot of other amazing people who have worked through the COVID period, whether it be healthcare workers, whether it be the bus drivers, the operators, the SkyTrain attendants. You put it down to those who had to go to work. I almost say the young kids who still worked at drive-through fast food restaurants, who were put in place and kept going to work so people could get it. People who work in grocery stores so we could get food in terms of it. So we did do, and we were very active in community events because we go through so many regions, whether it's Vancouver or Burnaby and New West and Port Moody and Surrey. We were always active in showing our support throughout the region. Next slide. This is kind of just what I mentioned there earlier, which was that while ridership being the brown linear line you see dropped, you'd see that for ourselves that the number of offenses, and this is crimes against person, crimes against property, didn't drop at the same rate as what we would have seen for the ridership drop. In terms of it. So when we compared March to April, there was an 11% drop in crimes against person between the 2 months, but a 72% drop in ridership. And similarly, when crimes against property, there was a 5% drop in that crime compared to 72% drop in ridership. So it just shows you that, like I say, the vast majority of people and this, who use transit and transportation networks aren't are not causing problems, aren't causing concerns, aren't involved in criminal or nuisance behaviors, and so it's not unreasonable to see that the drops will not drop accordingly or with each other in tow. And next slide. Again, I'll just echo what others have said. I've been extremely impressed. Our members have been coming to work. Sick time is down, overtime is down. The quality of work, they've adapted under some unique circumstances of having to still be engaged and having to still get out and deal with people in a public setting, even when everyone's telling you that's not what you should be doing. You know, and we did reprioritize our focus on what we were doing, and a lot of it was in the prevention and in the education area. So it wasn't go out there and perform a lot of enforcement activity during the last couple months. And that is my report.
Great, thank you very much, Dave. There are a few questions for you, so I'll start with Larry.
Thank you. I was just having trouble getting unmuted there. Again, I think this is another group of what are really essential service workers. And as we think about recovering financially, I hope everyone in the country will realize that these are essential service workers, just like those in hospitals and elsewhere. In your report, Dave, the one thing that worried me was a number of descriptions of something I don't think we've seen before, which is racist-based harassment and assaults of our Asian customers. Number one, is this a trend, or is it just something that's happened because of COVID? What are you doing about it? And is there any special training related to racial harassment and racism, not by our people, but by one customer to another? There, you described a couple of cases in your report where even other riders who stood up to protect people being harassed were then assaulted. And it was a very troublesome part of your report for me. Could you just speak to that, please, and let us know what you're doing?
Yeah, so thanks. It was a growing trend and a number of events that we suddenly increased, in particular towards the Asian community, which some people appeared to want to blame for COVID-19 in terms of it. So it wasn't just related to the transportation. The city of Vancouver and the Vancouver Police, who we work closely with all of our jurisdictional partners, in particular Vancouver, saw the same trend. A lot of it is us educating not only through our social media, through what we're able to about how this is wrong and it needs to be reported, and that we need to get involved in it right away. Like some of the concerns we had was an underreporting of this or people not getting involved. So our campaign goes out to say is if you see it, you need to report it to us. You need to tell us, even if you're just a witness to it, you need to get out to us. We've also done a lot of outreach to the communities that we're involved with, and we are involved with a lot of different communities, including the Chinese Asian community, of asking them for their concerns, where they see this is happening, and then working collaboratively with our jurisdictional police agencies to ensure that these events, as they come in, are reported, are investigated properly and thoroughly, and that hopefully we're able to drive it to the right or correct result at the end of the day. But it was growing in response to COVID, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you're making a priority of it. I just hope we will follow up with prosecutions and just making it, as Kevin said at the very beginning, it is unacceptable in our system, any form of racism for any reason, under any circumstances. And I really appreciate that you're making that a priority. Thanks.
I would, and just echoed, it wouldn't have been in the report, but some who follow social media would have seen there was another anti-Semitic. It was someone trying to a mischief by drawing or placing a swastika within a train here the other day. That was dealt with and led to an altercation with our members, and he was arrested and was taken, and even in those cases, like, we're connected where groups such as the Simon Wiesenthal Federation have reached out to us, but we take it I want people to know we take it very seriously, right? Like, that was and a real deep appreciation that there were several passengers who saw it happening, texted us right away using the system, and we were there right away to catch the act in progress. So.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Chief Jones, for the presentation. No doubt a difficult time in all aspects of the TransLink organization, and important to kind of see the role that the transit police has played. I wanted to touch on some of the larger conversations, though, that we're having regarding policing just in general in society. I think there's a microscope that's really on policing, and a lot of questions being asked about practices and what the future of policing is. And I know we're in a different context than the United States, but we're not completely in a different context as well too. And I think Canadian police agencies are having conversations here. And I don't expect you to have answers to all the questions being raised there, but I guess what I wanted to get a sense from you is what conversations are the transit police organization have, what the board with the transit police, are these the types of questions and conversations that that are being thought about and being engaged about the many questions being asked in society about policing and the future of policing?
So thanks for that. So we'll be meeting with the Transit Police Board tomorrow, but I don't think that it's any surprise that there is a significant call for change that's occurring. It may have started in the US, but is being echoed here in Canada. And it is that time that we don't, just sit back and try and explain or reaffirm or concrete a position here. I believe that, change is about to occur, what comes in there. One of the things we have to highlight in terms of it, though, is not that we were necessarily anticipating this, but we're a bit ahead of it. So one is we have our community outreach councils, right? So we have the Transit Police Community Chiefs Community Council, which is a vast array through the Lower Mainland where transit exists, that touches upon and has representations from various groups, whether it be from those who have mobility issues to sight issues to diverse backgrounds, education, and representation. So we've already met with that group as part of it, and looking to get more feedback on it. We have to open ourselves to those dialogues as to what is happening, what are the calls for change. I think it's also important that we have just undergone, from the transit police perspective, we've done a service delivery model review with an independent third party who's looking at what we do and how we do that, and we're waiting the results of that. They've needed to take some more time just because of what's recently happened here. We've also been open to, we have an application for a CSO, a community safety officer, call it a tiered policing model. That application has already been submitted to the province and we're awaiting. I believe the province really likes it and enjoys it. It will change, I'll call it tiers policing, where we put police officers where are really needed, and those who may need some specific authorities to do something, and perhaps and in an unarmed manner type thing in those positions and roles. We were ready to trial this already, and it has been submitted, the application, and we have it drafted up. But the other one is those continuing dialogues and presenting ourselves as to the changes that need to occur, and listening to everyone from the public that have it to those who work internally and will end up having to deliver the service at the end of the day. So I think we're well positioned in terms of reaching out into the community. We have a very good group of members, and I say the organization, who are open to change. We're reviewing our service delivery model as to what we do and how we do it. We have a tiered policing application that's already in place. And I think we got to, start, sometimes we're being held back because we're waiting approval from someone. And I wouldn't, and this isn't the reason you do it, but, the tiered policing model also comes with a cost savings to it. And we may have been ahead of the game unintentionally, but I think we're well positioned here to create change and a model for others.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Lorraine?
Thank you, Chief Jones, for your report. I just wanted to touch very briefly on the texting feature that you mentioned in your question or in one of your comments. And I'm just wondering how much is that continuing to be promoted, particularly to the casual user of the system? I would expect that the regular user would be very well aware of the texting number, but I'm just wondering what we're doing to ensure that everybody knows about that texting number.
So it is on every, I know SkyTrain car, it's by the door and it's by the little yellow strip that you can press as an emergency button. At least once a year, if not twice a year, we go out with a campaign of really promoting it. It's that text 877777 of putting it out there. We try to highlight it when it's been effective in terms of it. We do projects. There's one coming out recently here. We've done a campaign with high school students from Vancouver who have helped us create a campaign about what they would, kind of to them, both in a visual through graphics and art and messaging that we'll be working on. So it is trying to get it. The risk is that it's trying to repackage the same gift, the same message, so that someone just isn't thinking of it again in that way. But it has been very effective because we are one of, if the only still in this area that live monitors our text messaging for complaints that come in, because we want people on the system or around it to text us. Even if you're sitting there and you don't want to push a button or pick up or call the phone, you can send us a message through text messaging, which allows us to get there and deal with it. And that is live monitored at all times. So we do look at it. I give Stephen Crosby and his crew here a lot of thanks. And I know he works with the TransLink communications group. But now we've been engaging high school students who have graphic arts and communications programs to help us develop campaigns that will actually hopefully get it through to that young teenager, older teenager group, and it just becomes part of their life and culture to know this.
Great, thank you, Lorraine. Well, Dave, thank you very much for the report and in particular to the answers to the questions. And as you know, safety to our customers and our employees is paramount. And again, on behalf of the board, I want to express our appreciation to you and your team who ensure that that happens for us, and sometimes in very challenging circumstances, but we do appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next item on the agenda, which is number 5, the Finance and Audit Committee. The first item is a consent item that talks about the Patella Bridge condition monitoring report. And there's also a second item under the consent agenda, which is the Broadway subway project status. So both Zanny and Simon are available if there are questions. And I see that we do have some questions. So Lorraine, I'll turn it over to you first.
Oh, sorry. My hand wasn't up anymore. I think that was from the last
Maybe
one.
that's from the last item. Okay.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Jonathan, the same with you as well?
No, actually, I did have just a quick question about the Broadway subway project update.
Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Jonathan. I think Simon should be on the line to answer that.
Okay, so I read the report and obviously understood a lot of the preliminary work that's happening in the stages right now. I guess what I was having trouble kind of getting is picturing the project between now and opening day. And in particular, when are we targeting to see actually significant construction start on this project? Because I think for a lot of people, a project isn't real until that we get to that point. And I know we're 2 years past kind of approving and getting the financing for the project, and I know there's a ton of work that goes before there. But I guess I'm trying to get a better sense of over the next few years, when do we actually start seeing something more significant on the ground regarding this project?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Simon Tang here. Basically, I think, as we know, the project is delivered by the province. At the present moment, we don't know exactly what the project code schedule is until the proposal proponent is announced. However, we do have some indication from the province indicating that the award of the contract will be in August sometime. And while the projects commence, they will be doing a lot of paperwork submissions, design development works, and we're expecting that by January next year, there will be some kind of movement on site. I can say it for the project code, but from my experience, the first thing they will do is to excavate the launching shaft for the tunnel boring machine. That would be very close to the VC Clark station where the Great Northern Way station is going to be. So I think to answer your question in short, I think by the first quarter of next year, we'll be seeing some major excavation done in preparation for the launching shaft of the tunnel boring machine.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. We'll move on to the next section, item 5.2. And Sarah, you're going to provide a verbal report with respect to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting.
I am. Thank you, Tony. Just to echo the other presenters, this last few months have been, the focus has been on safety and health, as well as the changing times and how they've affected the budget at TransLink. And I would like to commend the whole team for being so quick to react to all of those factors. So when we looked, we spent a lot of time on the budget, and the team has spent a lot of time looking at various scenarios that could be the outcome of the pandemic. And the next item is more information on that. But as a result of that good work, they've been able to bookend the impact on the budget, which has given the organization a lot more insight in how to keep operating through this period. Kevin did mention that the announcement by the federal government on emergency relief, and we're certainly, I know the team is working very hard at ensuring that TransLink is eligible for whatever may come of that. Another item that is covered by the Finance Committee is the safety update. And I think we've heard today how much TransLink and all of its subsidiaries have worked so hard to keep their employees and the public safe. So thank you to everyone who has done that. In addition to reacting to the pandemic, the team has also been able to keep up on all their other duties, which is a tremendous feat. Including all of their statutory and regulatory requirements, the risk monitoring of the organization, and as we've heard, are still preparing to support the major infrastructure projects that are before us, such as Broadway Line and Surrey. So congratulations to the team, and thank you very much for this time to report.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. So we'll go on to the next item on the agenda here, and that's getting an update from Chris on our 2020 budget and forecast. So Chris, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. First of all, when the, sorry, I don't think I have my, can everyone hear me? Because I'm muted here.
Well, I can, but I'm not sure you're on. You're on now, Chris, I think. But okay, you're still on mute though. Yeah.
If I mute it, then. Okay.
Yeah.
When the 2020 budget was approved in March, it was in the early stages of the pandemic, and we were unclear of the impact. Oops, sorry. Sorry, just a moment. There we go. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulty. When the 2020 budget was approved in March, it was in the early stages of the pandemic, and we were unclear on what the impact was going to be on our financials. So we committed to bring back a forecast to you. We've been working on a number of scenarios as to how long and what the impacts of the pandemic will be on our revenues. The document presented shows one of those scenarios with both a high level travel demand and low level of travel demand. Our revenue loss estimates are in the range of 379 million to 533 million. Forecasted reductions to operating expenditures of 69 million include reducing some of the service and deferring the 2020 service expansion, reductions to funding for the major road network, and cutting non-essential expenditures. The total impact from the estimated revenue losses and our reductions to operating expenditures compared to the 2020 budget is between 310 million and 464 million. As you are aware, the situation is very fluid, and we are continuously updating a number of scenarios as our assumptions change. So Jeff Cross, our Vice President of Transportation Planning and Policy, is going to go through a few slides outlining the scenarios modeling that we are working on.
Thanks, Chris. Chair and board members and public, I'm happy to kind of give you the most current, maybe happy is the wrong choice of adjectives at this point, but give you the most current information that we have on what we believe the revenue implications would be and what the potential scenarios for the duration of the pandemic look like and the economic elements of that. So can we go to the next slide, please? So as you have seen in the past, we've designed basically 4 scenarios that we've been working on that are really separated by the horizontal and vertical analysis. The horizontal element on the left-hand side for scenarios 1 and 2 is about how smoothly and how quickly we move through this pandemic. As you're aware, we're in phase 2 right now by the provincial restart program. Phase 4 would be basically full lifting of that. So under scenario 1 and 2, we move through these phases kind of in a linear fashion and are done at some point in 2021. And in scenario 3 and 4, we're dealing with waves, multiple waves in some instances, and a longer pandemic period. Then the other dimension to this is what is the economic impacts of this? So on the vertical axis, in scenario 1 and 3, we come back with a quicker rebound and a slightly less deep recession. And scenario 2 and 4, the economic impacts on employment and economic levels and GDP, et cetera, are deeper and longer. So that we've been continuing to refine based on conversations happening across the region and the province, and thankfully through discussions with the provincial government as well. Next slide, please. So the provincial government restart program, as you've seen, has 4 phases. We are right now in this phase 2 to phase 3 sort of transition. What we've been doing is to break apart what the restart programs look like by sector that we know impact what mobility demands in the region are likely to be. So we've been trying, for example, to look at what happens to the retail sector or office-based work sites in phase 2. How do we see that changing in phase 3? And what things are not likely to be engaged until phase 4, until we have either immunity or an effective treatment in place. And so you can see what falls into each one of those, and those become to a certain degree the driver of demand, both for driving, for transit, for cycling and walking. One of the key ones that we've been looking at and continue to monitor is schools, whether it be K-12 or the post-secondary institutions, and what their reopening in the fall will look like, and what do we think, how do we think that progresses into 2021 as well, because they are a major segment on this. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the timing of how, under the different scenarios, how we see progressing between those different phases, which will then drive the demand. So scenario 1 is the quickest, where we move into phase 3. We are uninterrupted in that, and we have some level of widespread immunity by the end of June next year. And so the restrictions are relaxed, and we generally return to sort of fuller employment at that point. Scenario 2 is very similar, but we don't see a vaccination in place, or at least widespread vaccination of the full population until the end of 2021. In phase 3, we're calling hibernation, where we may go back into 2 waves, where we see a restriction in mobility, in retail activity, et cetera, and we go back to where we were in March and April, and then slowly make our way into phase 3, and then the potential of another fall wave in 2021. Phase 4 is basically where we're seeing multiple waves, that we're never really able to get out of this phase 2, that there are spikes, and as a result, the PHO and the province decide to keep the economy much tighter. Underlying all of this is, during the pandemic period right now, we are assuming that we will be using the physical distancing targets for our vehicles of roughly 2/3 on bus and 1/2 of rail. That comes into play because it can become a limiter of how much demand we can actually accommodate on the system if in case demand rebounds quite high, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Next slide, please. So we take this is how we develop our fare revenue estimates that go with each one of those scenarios, as you can imagine. We go through and we take a low and high level travel demand. So what percentage of, say, work from home people that return actually go back to transit, or go to cycling or walking or drive. In phase 2, we break it down by each segment of the economy to kind of understand what the overall pool of demand is likely to look like. Phase 3, we limit that if indeed demand may be higher at a system level or at major corridors, higher than what we can accommodate with the service levels and the vehicle capacity that we have. And then in the step 4 of this, we look at applying that to actual programs such as the BC Bus program, the UPass program, to what degree is that in place, and when and at what scale, to understand what our revenues would look like. I would say right now we are using bands. We are very early into these, so they're somewhere between a forecast and what's the realm of the possible at this point. Next slide. Chris pointed to what some of the impacts would be for 2020 between the different scenarios. What we're showing here is for all 4 scenarios, for the consolidated impacts on the revenue losses relative to our investment plan / 2020 budget for those 2 years. We've broken them down by our major revenue sources. And we've also shown them in the low and high travel demand, and compared that to what we showed you in the Mayor's Council back in April, when we were dealing with obviously a lot less information to be able to put bounds on this. You can see that in some places compared to April, our revenue forecasts are a little bit better. In part, that's because the economy may be reopened faster than what we were assuming in April, where we thought the most optimistic was July 1st, as opposed to May 19th when things started relaxing. What we've also seen that is a double-edged sword is that the fuel tax revenue declines that we were forecasting in 2020 are not as deep as what we thought they may be. So that helps us from a revenue side. The flip side that Kevin referred to, and we'll talk to in a future item, is that driving is rebounding faster, and that does cause some concern about congestion on the roads, as well as long-term habits, and how does transit compete with that. So you can see these are the bounds. They're a very large set of bounds. We are definitely in deep uncertainty at this point, but in a best case scenario with quick recovery, we are somewhere in the $500 to $900 million net revenue losses. This is not taking into account yet some of those expenditure reduction measures that Chris highlighted that are in the report. that are already in place for 2020, and we'll examine what could go forward in 2021. In the worst case scenarios, with multiple waves, we are roughly $1 billion to $1.4 billion in net revenue losses, which show just how deep that is, and in some cases, I believe is roughly just under half of our actual operating budget. So very significant, and shows the urgency for support from the federal government and the provincial government on the pandemic related losses. Next slide. So what we're doing is taking these different scenarios and trying to match that against the demand that we're seeing on the system to try and narrow in where we think we'll be under these different phases. As you can see right here, this is for scenario 1. Which is identical to scenario 2 with the exception of it going into phase 4 a little bit earlier in June of 2021. You can see that we had developed a low and a high that were somewhere around just over 20% of our pre-COVID levels, up to about 60% through 2020 and into mid-2021 before getting a little bit higher. You can see based on our first roughly 5 to 6 weeks of ridership forecasting since the economy is kind of reopened, that we tend to be more on the higher end of this, that we were about 31% or so of pre-COVID levels, and we will see what happens when we move, if we indeed are able to move into phase 3, how do we track against this? So we have been using this, we've created a slide like this for all 4 scenarios, and we'll bring that back on a constant basis for you to see where we think we are, so that hopefully we can narrow those forecasts and also determine what service levels would be appropriate for 2021 to think about how do we match that against our demand. Next slide. I think that's it, Chair, so we'll turn it back over to you for any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff and Chris. Oh, is it not going through? Okay, hopefully this is coming through. So thank you very much, Jeff and Chris. And I see that Lorraine has a question.
Jeff, just on the slide that's up on the screen now, have you, when you did these originally, there's kind of this fundamental shift of where people are choosing to work or where they're given the opportunity to work. And I'm just wondering if this band would broaden given the uncertainty about the return to the office versus the working from home variation that is presenting, and similar with schools.
Yes, that is the biggest determinant right now, Lorraine. So in the region, our estimates are that roughly 650,000 jobs can work from home, and were working from home at least during phase 1, compared to, I think, pre-COVID, about 110,000 jobs. So 650 is about half of the jobs. So then what's driving this big band at this point is what proportion of those actually return to work or school, to your point, and for what duration of each week, workday during the weeks. So if half of that work from home returns during phase 3, that becomes closer to the higher end of that. It's not the only segment that drives demand. There's obviously all the other elements, whether it be shopping, access for recreational, medical, all of those components. But for that segment, roughly half of those people going back to work on a regular basis. The lower end of the band, I believe, is around 15% of people going back, at least in phase 3. We have not yet developed a more subtle curve where if we are in phase 3 for a long period of time until a vaccination is in place, are there gradual relaxations of that and more people find a way to go back? But that's something we'll track over time.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Lorraine. Karen?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Jeff. I just have a question. I know things are moving quite rapidly, and we're seeing changes in our customers coming back and using transit. And I wondered if, Jeff, if you could give us a bit of an update on sort of most recent numbers and where that fits in with the table of the different scenarios. And then Chris, I wondered if you could just give us a bit of an update on the debt markets over the last couple of weeks and whether anything is importantly happening there.
Good question, Karen. So I think this dotted line on here is probably about 2 weeks old. As Kevin mentioned, I think in his opening remarks, we are looking at this in really in depth on a weekly basis, but we're even doing daily monitoring to kind of understand what's happening and to help with some of our service planning as well. So I believe last week we were just over 30% of pre-COVID levels. So you could take that dotted line up a dot or two and maybe have plateaued on that for a few days. But I wouldn't want to put too much trend in a few days. So we'll have to see kind of weeks at a time. But that would put us like more towards the top of this band. Not exactly at it, but a little bit below it, which is encouraging, at least from a forecasting perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And for the update on the debt market, as you're aware, we did go to the market in April and borrowed $250 million for a portion of our capital requirement. So that was really good to get at least part of our funding raised. The debt market's actually, it is still volatile. However, there has been a lot of money, a lot of provinces have been very successful in issuing bonds, as well as municipalities. So I'm feeling a lot more confident in the markets now than I was back in April. But having said that, it is still volatile. Also, depending what happens with if we get a second wave, what that might do in the markets, later in the fall or even next year, all of that is uncertainty, but money has been moving. And so I am optimistic that we will be able to raise the remaining funds that we have, fingers crossed. So that's a little bit of good news that money is moving.
Great. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And thanks, Chris, to you and to Jeff. So we'll move to the next item, 5.4 on the agenda, which is an update on the Surrey Langley SkyTrain project. And I think, Zanny, you're going to be speaking to this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a quick informational update to the board on the Surrey Langley SkyTrain project. I'll limit my comments to two aspects, the technical and the approvals. On the technical side, the team remains on schedule to be ready to go to procurement. End of July was the original schedule, and the team has by and large met that schedule. So the project is very near ready to go to procurement. The last significant milestone was last month when the Mayor's Council approved the arrangement agreement with Surrey for Surrey's contribution to this project. On the approval side, the business case remains under review by the province and the federal government. That review process is going well. We're getting good questions, which the team has been answering, and we're not expecting any problems on the technical side with that review. The financial piece, following on the presentation from Jeff and Chris, we need more certainty on our finances to enable an investment plan, which would be required to launch this project. Our original target was an investment plan this month or next month in late Q2 or early Q3. It's now looking more likely to be later in the fall that we'll have enough certainty on our finances to be able to put forward an enabling investment plan. So the team is targeting readiness by around the September timeline to be able to launch this project. So I'll just pause it there, Chair, and take any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zenny. I'm just waiting to see if anyone has any questions. It looks like there are no questions. Oh, no, sorry. Murray?
Thanks, Tony. Just the question I have relates to the business case that's been submitted and the sensitivity of that business case to ridership and how that's being managed in the context of the uncertainty about ridership over time, particularly with respect to the point raised by Lorraine, with respect to more people the propensity for more people to work from home in the future. How is that being managed in the context of this review?
Thank you, Murray. Good question. We've looked at that, and it was a good exercise for us to go through with the benefits and the costs of the business case. And it helped us remember that these projects will exist and serve the region for between 50 to 100 years. And when we look at that context, growth and ridership, which could potentially be slowed down due to COVID for 2 or 3 years, becomes insignificant in kind of a 2050 to 2075 horizon, which is really the horizon that this project serves. So the business case remains very solid, despite any minor fluctuations in work from home or educational procedures or how the economy grows. What we tend to see with these economic shocks is a few years of potentially slower growth, but then recovery, which sets us back by 1 or 2 years compared to a 50 to 75 year horizon. It really makes very little on the robustness of.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Murray. And thank you, Zanny, for that report. We're going to move on to item number 6 in the agenda, which is the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee. And we're going to get a report from the chair of that committee, Larry.
Thanks, Tony. It was a pretty busy time, not only in the response to COVID, but in terms of the teams continuing to forward as much of the work that was on the agenda as possible. During this time, we were very pleased as a committee, as I think the whole board was, to see coming on board a new vice president of development in a new development branch. Richard Tam is there, and I'm sure our next meeting or one of our public meetings will be seeing Richard. We have great expectations. This has become, I think, for all of us, expectations about potentially new and different funding sources to take the pressure off of the fare box in case we face any other kind of emergency, as we've just seen with COVID and what's happened to our ridership. And he's moving very quickly. I had a report from him yesterday. He's moving very quickly to bring forward different propositions for the board's consideration along with the staff. When I say that we've been dealing with almost business as usual in many cases, I won't go into a lot of these, but we dealt with 11 different reports on our consent agenda that is moving everything forward and reporting in the normal way. And I really commend the staff for that. We also dealt with the report on the Surrey Langley SkyTrain update that you've just heard from Sani, and had some comments on that. And we also heard a report on what you're going to hear in a moment about TransLink 2050 and how that is being coordinated in a much better way with the Metro Vancouver planning to 2050 now. A bit of the lag in time on one hand has kind of helped us get those two processes more hand in hand. And there's been some other initiatives, which I know that the staff are going to be reporting on in just a few minutes, so I won't go any further into that. We also had a very helpful and interesting report on the priorities for transit service for the fall of 2020, giving us a lot of comfort that the service is going to be offered near normal. A few cases where there are some cutbacks just to help to deal, frankly, with areas where there is more crowding than we expected because of the new capacity of our system that we're honoring, so that we can keep separations in place. And that was given to us by Sarah Ross, a very excellent report, and we're able to give our advice on that and to confirm really the strategy that has been very carefully put together by the staff to maximize the availability of service where we need it, when we need it, even in the face of this new capacity that we're facing. And then we had a very helpful report that I think the public's going to feel the benefits of very quickly on new ways of engagement during the time of this pandemic. You know, we've had to stay separate. As a result of that, the normal techniques we've used to reach out to people, and I think Kevin at the beginning described just how much we've been reaching out to people. Many of those techniques were no longer viable, but the staff haven't sat still. They have been thinking of the new ways to engage so that we don't let public engagement either go by the wayside, which in principle the TransLink's not prepared to do, or because of the lack of engagement tools, see our projects fall behind. And it was really good. The committee felt very confident that the new techniques of engagement are as contemporary as they can be. They are going to be able to take the place of some old techniques, and they will allow us to continue to reach out as we have now made our principle and our practice in TransLink to our users, our citizens, special interest groups, and everyone else on every single move that is being made by TransLink moving forward. So that was the committee. It was a busy committee, and I'll take any questions, but I'm sure you're going to be hearing about 2050 in just a moment, and that may be where you would see most questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. With that report, I think we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, 6.2, and that's an update on Transport 2050. And Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chair. This is entitled an update on Transport 2050, but it's really about what are we doing in the next months and years, given the thinking we've been putting into Transport 2050, and specifically the lens that I'm going to discuss a bit with the assistance of Andrew McCurran, our Director of Strategic Planning and Policy, is what does COVID mean to the planning that we're doing? Larry pointed to one element, which is around timing, a very pragmatic element, and how do we sync these efforts up to engage the public effectively and sync it up with what Metro Vancouver is doing and what the province is doing also on their integrated land use and transportation economic planning around the Lower Mainland. But the other piece is what trends were we seeing in Transport 2050, and some of those are highlighted in the report, and we'll go into those a little more deeply here. That we need to think about as we're rebuilding and recovering and setting the right foundation for where the region wants to be going. So next slide. One more, please. Thank you. When we came to you in, I believe, March, we suggested because of COVID, that we would pause the engagement and really most of the policy work on Transport 2050 until later this year to see how the pandemic would unfold and what the restrictions would be around both our collective bandwidth to take on long-term conversations, as well as the ability for the public and stakeholders to look at issues in Transport 2050, which is really our long-range strategy in light of what we're dealing with in the here and now. What we've since realized, obviously, is you can't totally park those conversations. The stories are everywhere about what does this mean for city building in general? What does it mean to transit specifically? I think Murray's question to Sandy on the Surrey Langley SkyTrain is one that comes up rightfully from policymakers and stakeholders in the public. What could this do to some of our bigger investments, whether they be really long-term ones for decades and even centuries, as Sandy pointed out, or even our expansion plans that we were considering in 2020 and 2021. How do we look at those things? So we can't totally stop those conversations. The policy work on Transport 2050, and you'll see some glimpses of some of the areas Andrew will go through, continues. What we're now thinking is we'll probably start engaging you on the longer term elements later this fall and with Metro Vancouver as well to make sure we're syncing those up. Next slide, please. Kevin spoke rather bullishly in the AGM about the future of cities. We tend to agree as a planning division, and I think our colleagues at Metro Vancouver and our municipalities agree, and we're seeing this from urbanists across the country, that the trends that have been so pronounced over the last 50 to 100 years towards rapid urbanization, we see those as only continuing. And there are a number of reasons for those. Kevin went into quite a few of them. And they all deal with proximity and density, which is different, and Larry's been good at pointing this out, than overcrowding and crowding. But density and being people and bringing people into close proximity is wonderful for as economic powerhouse, for cultural and creative, for educational purposes, for affordability, and for impact on the land, so sustainability as well. All of those objectives are well ingrained in our provincial and our regional standing policies as it relates both to land use and to transportation. People point often to transit and concern about proximity anxiety, and we understand that. That's a natural reaction that we think will persist to a certain degree during the pandemic, and we need to do our best to make people feel safe and to ensure that they are safe and that they have adequate access to move around so that long-term habits are not generated and that they're able to move affordably through the region. As far as the long-term prospects, one other thing I'd like to point out is the land use plan. We always say the best transportation plan is a great land use plan. And the land use plans in this region are well established. The OCPs are accordingly. You're seeing the development around our SkyTrain systems, much of which is just underway, that is going to go on for decades, which is going to be driving demand for transit and for cycling and walking and being able to work closer to place when you need to as well. So complete communities. Those are trends that we see really helping us. It's not to say there will not be other measures, and I think Lorraine was asking me questions about what does work from home mean. Those are trends that we had seen in the past, and maybe the hurdles that have existed from a behavioral perspective or from a capital or from policies and protocols are being accelerated to address that. And we will see some vestiges of that permanently. And we think some of those things have been areas that we have been pushing on for a long time because we plan our mobility networks, whether it be the roads or our transit, to be able to try and accommodate the peak and the peak of the peak for travel. If we're able to smooth that out during the day, find alternative times for people to be able to interact, et cetera, then we're able to have a much more efficient transportation system. We also may see, though, that the acceptability of overcrowding may change for some time and maybe permanently. And those are things that would offset where there may be reductions in demand. Maybe in the future, we'll actually have to provide even more capacity or space for people to feel comfortable and use the system efficiently. Next slide. So we are transitioning, and I say we because I think it's both TransLink and Metro Vancouver and the municipalities to really think about how do the rebuilding and the recovery phases set us on a path to actually accelerate achieving the objectives that were laid out by this region and the province already. And what are the opportunities that we can take to try and move people more towards cycling and walking and to more sustainable modes, to make sure that during the pandemic and afterwards that we're giving transit its best opportunity to compete and make sure that it remains viable, convenient, and affordable for this region. We know many people do not have an option other than transit, cycling, or walking. Owning a personal vehicle is incredibly expensive and would only add to the affordability crisis that this region faces during a time when we're obviously dealing with widespread unemployment or underemployment as well. So making sure that people have adequate options that are really attractive, whether it be TransLink services or otherwise, is going to be really important. To that end, and then I'll hand it to Andrew, we are working with Metro Vancouver and the COVID task force of mayors, including Mayor Cote and the regional planning committee that he chairs, and Mayor Froese is on that committee as well, to look at how do we dovetail our collective actions to accelerate things, including the Declaration for Resilient Canadian Cities, which is being passed around Canada right now, which has fundamental actions in 20 different areas around land use, transportation, and sustainability. So that's work that I think Andrew's going to give you a glimpse on that we feel really is compatible with this movement that every city is looking at right now. So I'll turn it over to Andrew for the next slide.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'll just spend a few minutes discussing some of the items in the latter half of the report in front of you, and really describing that in order to advance the goals, the regional goals that Jeff just described on that last slide, there are some impacts, some trends that we're seeing as a result of COVID that we're going to want to accelerate, some positive trends that we want to support, nurture, and accelerate, and some that are working counter to our regional goals that we are going to want to mitigate. And so I'll just touch on briefly on each of these. Reduced transit ridership, you know, you've heard a lot about today already, is really the biggest concern. And so in addition to the Safe Operating Action Plan work that we've already got underway and have launched, thinking about ways to reduce crowding further, how to provide information to passengers on crowding is going to be a big part of that. How to increase the reliability and the convenience and the travel speeds of bus service in the context of probably growing traffic and growing congestion is going to be really essential on this point. So what can we do to look at improving transit priority, bus lanes, signal priority, that kind of thing, working with our municipal partners more urgently, I think, over the coming year is really the key here. Increased driving is going to be a side effect of as people feel safer in their own personal automobiles. And that's, you know, completely understandable. The risk and the downside is growing congestion. We've got limited road capacity, as Jeff had mentioned. So looking at things to whatever we can do to discourage unnecessary driving by providing competitive alternatives, by reallocating some space, as municipalities have been doing, road lanes to walking, cycling, and public realm, but also to more space for buses to give buses and transit really their best chance. Increased walking and cycling is a really positive impact that we've seen, and municipalities have been across the region really looking at ways to allocate more space to walking and cycling and public realm. And ideally, and we've been working with our partners there to make sure that those changes are neutral or positive for transit operations, so we can get some win-wins there. Jeff mentioned telework and just generally increased trip substitution by digitization. So we've got these opportunities not just for working, but also for medicine and online learning and shopping and retail. Much more of that activity is happening online. On the work front, you know, we think there's quite a bit of potential there to for some broader regional coordination with employers to help more evenly distribute the peak spreading benefits across the day and the week. So we're keen to get involved through our Travel Smart program, working with those employers. Some more potential on the freight side to improve the efficiency of urban deliveries. And on that front, you heard earlier today or yesterday an announcement about our pilot program with Pigeon Box smart lockers at our SkyTrain stations. And you know, that really actually helps minimize the circulation of delivery vehicles in neighborhoods and makes that trip making by individuals more efficient. They can come pick up their parcels at SkyTrain stations. So that's just one small example, but we think there's a lot of potential to help optimize urban freight. Vehicle automation, those especially first last mile contactless deliveries, there's quite a lot of increased focus and investment in that area. And so from a regional perspective, continuing to work with the province and dialoguing to make sure any legislation or regulations that come down the line in the coming years are really supportive of our regional objectives. there's likely a lot of churn and consolidation in the mobility sector. We're quite keen to partner with a lot of players, the nonprofit and private sector players. So we'll be, keenly in discussions with a number of those partners to make sure that that we can leverage any changes in the public interest for potential partnerships. Jeff mentioned, some discussion around what, and Kevin earlier today talking about the future of cities and making the distinction between density and crowding. To the extent that there is questioning around demand for higher density living, clearly Metro Vancouver municipalities and TransLink need to be helping support measures to make that higher density living more attractive. Unemployment, household financial strain will be obviously a concern as we continue to have discussions around funding strategy and moving forward with how do we, in this context, make sure that there's sufficient funds to provide a reliable, sustainable transportation system. And the last point there, worth noting, just that, and this isn't true across the board, but at least in the British Columbia context, in our region, I think polls have shown that people, there is a greater sense of social solidarity, a greater sense of trust in science, and willingness to work together on collective action. And I think all of the problems we've described above, in addition to the health and economic crisis that we're in, really require that social solidarity and collective action. So that's a benefit that we can leverage. And Jeff, I'll turn it back to you.
Actually, that completes our work. As I mentioned, Chair, we will be working with Metro Vancouver. One of the things that we'd like to really understand is how do we support ongoing dialogues in coming weeks and months, even with the restrictions of COVID, that help support moving forward on some of these elements, whether it be directly with the municipal councils or with Metro Vancouver on resilient cities, et cetera, that we can help sponsor a conversation that sets us on the right foot for later this year and into early next when we really pick up Transport 2050 in earnest. So we will be bringing forward policy memos for you on where we're seeing some of these trends going for T2050 through the Joint New Mobility Committee with the Mayor's Council and through the board this fall. Back to you, Chair, or to Larry for any comments or questions.
Great, thank you, Jeff and Andrew. There are questions. I think, Andy, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Tony. I'd like to again reiterate what many have said and thank staff for the amazing work that they've done through this turbulent time. And echo Larry's comments that despite having to deal with the crisis, the amount of ongoing work that the reports, the information kept flowing has just been phenomenal. I kind of plant myself in Kevin's optimistic group of outcomes that we can achieve through this. And I think it's interesting to note that on this report, while there is a lot of focus on COVID, it is the 2050 report that we're talking about. We're talking about what's going to be happening decades from now. And one of the opportunities I think we've seen already, I think as we were going down our 2050 consultation report, having to put on pause, lines up nicely with some of the Metro, the Climate 2050, the regional growth. And as Jeff repeatedly says, land use and transportation cannot be separated. So I think there's some great synergies we may be able to seize out of this. But I also want to, it ties in with the earlier reports as well. I think it's too easy to get wrapped up in the immediacy when we're talking about 2050, and I keep comparing what we're going through now to what happened 100 years ago with the epidemic. Almost identical timeframes, complete upheaval, and nobody probably could see past that at that time. But I'm sure in 1950, nobody was talking about the Spanish flu. There was events had overtaken it, planning had overtaken it. We're talking of some projects we're looking now, the Patella Bridge, potentially Surrey, Broadway. These are century-long projects, and these are things that are going to be vital for our region going forward. So I just think that this process, as we go through on the 2050, hasn't diminished by COVID in any way. If anything, it's emphasized the importance. If we look at history, societies will bounce back. I don't think cities are going to disappear. I fully believe they're going to be the engines of our economy going forward. And I think we've got a unique opportunity right now to use this time wisely going forward to look what that could be. I think the challenge of us is trying to keep this forefront in people's presence especially when we're looking for funding solutions in times of immediate crisis, that we have to keep going back to saying that these are long-term investments that are going to pay off for years and years to come. So I really appreciate the work, the research, and the thought that's gone in this, and just like to compliment the staff. And hopefully we'll get back on and doing our consultations in the fall or the spring, and be able to bring something back that really outlines our future, as well as some of the previous reports we've seen for this region.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Great. Thank you, Andy. I think great comments, but I don't think there was a question there. So we'll move to Murray.
Thank you, Tony. What crossed my mind when Andrew was going through this table that's on the screen right now is reduced transit ridership. Maybe what it should include in brackets or something for the wrong reasons, meaning shifting to cars or, less efficient means of transportation, because I can see if people are opting to ride a bike or walk, that's actually a good thing. And work from home. So I was, what crossed my mind was Hydro's Power Smart program, where it is expensive to provide the infrastructure to transport people. And what Hydro attempts to do is reduce the demand for power so they don't have to build more expensive power stations, that whatever capacity we have is used efficiently for the right reasons. So I'm just thinking out loud, but that idea of reduced transit ridership isn't necessarily bad if people are shifting to the right modes.
Yeah, we take your point. There's two dimensions. I think there's what's happening during the pandemic, which we know we're going to have reduced ridership just because the economy is not going to be running fully at this time. But in light of that, how can we actually shape that and provide the incentives that you're talking about, Murray, so that we are able to smooth down the peak period? Because even if demand for transit is lower, with the physical distancing that we're putting in place on our vehicles, et cetera, supply could indeed become an issue at times. So just like it was previously with travel demand management, we think it's going to be really important both during the pandemic period and immediately afterwards, while we're trying to encourage people to come back in times when we have really good supply, et cetera, and finding ways for them, if there are alternatives, either to making the trip or to doing so cycling or walking. Or one of the things we've heard anecdotally is people using their neighborhoods for much more of their services. Those are all great things that we want to be able to incentivize.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Murray. Seeing no other questions, I just want to thank you, Jeff and Andrew, for your presentation. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And before I ask for questions on the consent agenda, which is some revisions to our board governance manuals and review of articles, I think Jennifer has a few words to say.
I do. Thank you, Tony. I just wanted to note a correction to a title on pages 18 and 106 of the manual. It should read Vice President, Real Estate, Commercial Strategy and Innovation on both pages instead of Vice President, Commercial Strategy and Innovation. So I would propose the revisions for approval with those minor edits included. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. So these are mainly housekeeping items. So are there any questions for Jennifer on what she's just stated or on the report?
I'll move adoption.
So, okay, move second.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much for that. We'll now turn to a report from the chair of the HR and Governance Committee, Marcella.
Thank you, Chair. I think we have 2 minutes in our agenda, so I'll speak quickly. First of all, I just want to again acknowledge the HR team, the governance team, for all the work that they've done within TransLink. We all know the stresses and changes that they've gone through and that they've responded to in just an absolutely excellent and overtime way. So I just want to thank and commend them. First of all, with respect to the item that you've just approved, one of the issues in there was adding to the skills experience required on the board, that of community engagement and leadership for the board's information. That was an item that came up last year during the recruitment process from the Mayor's Council through to the screening panel. and we had considered it at that time. I will go very quickly to the VP of HR's quarterly report, which was, as always, complete, fulsome, and transparent. She reviewed all the activities going on in the group under the 3 strategic objectives that were approved in the people plan that we've all seen. The first was build a strong foundation. Second, put people first. 3, invest in the future. So she identified, we went through the regular issues that we go through, which is looking at the number of employees across the enterprise, gender by roles and function. We look at turnover. We look specifically at progress on diversity and inclusion, with a great emphasis on that one. She provided an update with respect to the learning portal for employees and how employees are being supported for development and advancement in the organization. We spent a lot of time looking at the implications of COVID internally, how they have been handled, what has been done within the teams to keep people safe very quickly and supported very well by the whole organization, and particularly IT. Basically, in 2 days, everybody was at home working, which was a fantastic action, other than those that had to work within an office. We talked about the cleaning and sanitization of the workplace, and you've already heard about that on the buses and trains, but we talked about within the other contexts within the organization. We talked about a successful lean project, looking at how you could look at learning opportunities. And we heard from the presidents of the 2 operating companies with respect to activities on the HR side in their team. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Marcella. So that is actually the last item on the agenda, and seeing that there are no questions from Marcella, that does bring our meeting to a conclusion. I want to first take this opportunity to thank all the presenters, as well as all the reports that you provided to the board. I think that was very helpful to us. A special thanks to the team who sort of coordinated this virtual meeting. I know that these are challenging times, and I know that we have to sometimes do our business differently, but thank them for doing that. And I think lastly, I think has been echoed a number of times by various board meetings. I think the board just really wants to thank all the employees at TransLink. The last few months have been challenging, and I know that particularly for the frontline workers, you've continued to sort of represent TransLink, provide that excellent customer service to those essential workers. And that's really, I think, brought us to a state here in BC where we're well on our way to sort of a recovery, and we're able to do that. So again, a special thank you to all the employees at TransLink for the work that you have done. And lastly, just to thank you to the members of the public who have joined us for our meeting, taking time from your busy day. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next quarterly meeting. And with that, I'll bring the meeting to an end. Great, thank you.